Hi, Life Groups. Tonight we're going to be continuing speaking into our M3 series. If you remember last time, we looked at part 1 of our Sunday night conversation between us as we spoke into M3. So tonight we're looking at the next part. So sit back, enjoy, and then we'll discuss it afterwards as usual.
I want to ask you in a minute around how you guys hear from God regarding your giving. But before we do, just while we're talking about stewardship, why do you think it's important for a young generation to grasp this while they are young? Like, why shouldn't I just wait till I've got a full-time job and I'm earning heaps of money and then I can give and be generous?
Yeah. I think it hugely is about, to be honest, starting early. I'll just give a bit of my testimony around giving when I grew up. My mum was the first Christian in our family. She's here tonight. And I witnessed her as a single mum giving every week at church. And back in those days, I feel like such an old person when I say back in the days, when they used to pass the bottles around, as a kid, I loved when mum would give me the money and I got to put it in. Like, it felt really good. And I got to witness that. Right. I got to see that week in, week out. I saw my mum's faithfulness in giving, even though times were tough. Right. But we also never went without, even though I'm sure there were very difficult seasons. It's an interesting change that we see now, because parents and children, we're not seeing that interaction. Kids aren't growing up necessarily witnessing their parents physically giving and seeing that happen. So we have to be intentional as parents to teach our children on this. So anyway, I digress. So from the moment, and it was thanks to my mum's teaching that giving is what we do and it's faithfulness to God, is that as soon as I started working, I started tithing. So it just was not even really, to be honest, not much of a decision. It was just that's what I will do. So I started giving from the moment I got a job, and it was a very low-paid job. But as time went on, and I just continued to be faithful, and I have to be honest though, I was probably sold at that point on a concept, because that's what we do. And it wasn't actually coming at that point from a heart of worship. It was just this is what we do. And so that is always going to get tested. So it was in our probably mid-20s. Again, just continued to faithfully give. That's what we do. Carl was in ministry training college, and I was the breadwinner at the time, working the ad agency.
I was a kept man. It was amazing.
Yeah. So I was responsible, and always have been, for our budgeting. Carl was responsible for our spending. And sometimes those things just didn't quite add up. And we were in a season of our life where we just seemed to keep going further and further into debt. And our credit card debt was getting to the point of being so overwhelming. And I took responsibility for that. I was in charge of the money. I was earning the income. I had to make it work. And I got more and more stressed, to the point where one day I decided I had to look at the credit card statement, and I looked at our outgoings and I went, I have no room to find this money. We're in trouble. So what I was going to do, without having a discussion with my husband, was I was going to stop our tithe to pay off our credit card. Now, interestingly, in the Bible, in Malachi chapter 3, verse 10, it says this: bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty. The only time that God says, test me. And see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be room enough to store it. Well, I tested God in reverse. So I had seen the faithfulness of God and given faithfully. And in this season, because it was a concept, not a conviction, actually, I decided to take that away, because I needed that money to pay off our debt. And I'll tell you what, God showed me his faithfulness, because no, things didn't get better. It was amazing that more holes seemed to appear in the bucket. Right. And we went further and further into it. Bills turned up, things broke. I couldn't get over the fact that even though I had this extra money I was now trying to pay things off with, we were going further into debt. Right. So I started tithing again, and it turned around. And it totally turned, and it doesn't make sense on paper. If you were to put it on paper, you go, this does not make sense. More income against the debt, things got worse. Giving to God, less going onto the credit card, somehow we were paying it off quicker.
He also stopped me spending. That helped.
There might have been a little bit of stewardship
She actually
discussion.
cut me off and
in
put me
there?
on a debit card,
Yeah.
of all things. Just on that very quickly, we have in our own lives very personal conviction around tithing. So we have always done it. But it is a conviction, it is part of our worship. When it comes to over and above, and we're talking about that with M3, God won't ask you to go into debt to give. And I want to be really, really clear on this. We were in debt, found it really hard to give. We went on a journey of creating margin. It takes time. So if you're sitting there and you've got a whole lot of debt and you're thinking, man, I don't know how I could actually, have to give on my credit card in order to give to the offering. God doesn't want you to go into debt. But he does want you to start the journey with him of creating margin, creating financial margin. We talk about creating margin in all areas of our life, but one of them is financial margin. If you can build in margin and get to a point where you actually have some credit, you're in credit, you now can be generous. You now can respond to offerings. It doesn't feel like a twisted arm up the back because you've planned for it. And God sees all of that stewardship and decision making as worship. God, I'm going to carve out room.
That's right.
Over and above my regular giving so that I can be generous.
Yeah.
So if you have no room and the M3 offerings coming up, I'll tell you what, start working on margin.
Yeah.
Start readjusting your budget. Start being faithful and saying, God, I'm just going to readjust my budget in this stage of my life so I can create margin. People go, I can't create margin. No, we all can.
Yeah.
We realised this in our own journey early on. I'm going to shut up in a minute, John, I promise.
That's good, man. That's
We
great.
realised this in our own journey is when we went to buy our second house, it was a big step up and there was a miracle provision of God for us to be able to do it. I remember walking in there that day and going, far out, I can't believe the house we own. Like, I can't believe we bought this house. It was an amazing day, eh? And then I went, as I was praying and thanking God, I went, is this house enough though? Or have I got another house I'm waiting for? Because we'd just left our small house to get into a bigger house. Nothing wrong with that, it's awesome. But I don't feel like God's saying you can't have another house, but it was a test of the heart. Is this enough? Can we now begin to create margin and room for you to be a blessing? Because what we do with our budget so often is we stretch and we spend every cent we've got.
Yeah, true.
And then we grow and we stretch and we spend every cent we've got. And we've created no margin. We haven't had wise conversations around margin. So we got to a point with our house where we're like, this is actually enough.
Yeah,
This is good enough.
it's good.
Now we want to actually be able to steward our money and do something for the kingdom.
Yeah.
Personal conviction.
Yeah.
But I think it's an important conversation to have. Husbands and wives have that conversation. How are we starting to plan? Young adult, how am I starting to plan for creating margin in my life?
It's really good. Because I mean,
Thanks, Jono.
No, it's great. I mean, one of the passages that's been in my heart for the last few weeks is godliness with contentment is great gain.
Yeah.
And that's going, okay, at what point can I be content with what I've got? Because in order to create margin, like we're talking about, financial margin, you've either got to go to your boss and ask for a pay rise, or you know, so Tim,
Don't do that, church staff.
Except for church.
yeah, except for church stuff, or you've got to cut back on the nice to haves rather than the need to haves, you know. And I think that's all of, like you said, bringing order to your life is a form of worship.
We have to do it in the church.
Yeah,
We have to do it all the time in church, yeah. And in terms of stewardship, like that'd be a great scenario, John. If he came and asked me if he could have more salary, I'd say, okay, well, Ponchai needs money to eat this week. You know, House of Hope needs money to give the poor in the neighbourhood. Do you really need a pay rise? And we make those decisions all the time around here, as a group, as a collective. And part of that stewardship, going back to it, that margin is getting the best out of what you've got. This table we're sitting at is the floorboards of the old homestead that was here. The screen was from AliExpress. You know? The projector was from next door when we upgraded in there. The stage is secondhand. You try and do the best with what you've got and do excellence with that, as opposed to going out, we must have the nicest stage possible. We must have the best screen possible. We must have the newest table possible. No, you do what you can with what you've got in front of you.
Don't mock the table, bro.
Carl built it. Carl
beautiful
built it,
thing.
so
beautiful. It's amazing.
Very nice.
Loving it.
Very nice, honey.
Because we're always weighing up between the needs of our local environment and what's happening everywhere else.
Yeah, and we've had to do that in a lot of different areas in church. Like, I mean, if you think of even coffees. Do you want to talk a little bit about the coffees? You're not a coffee drinker, but we made some calls around some coffees.
Don't get him to talk about coffee. He hates it.
That's what I mean.
Talk about coffee. Karen, do you want to talk about coffee? No. No, look, I mean, and same thing. We're going, where can we find margin that we can help other people more? Our guys do pastoral care visits all the time. It's a little bit awkward if you do that without a drink, right? So our pastors were going out and having coffees out at cafes. Well, that's $10 every time you go. One for you, one for them. We make them here ourselves. Pod coffee for $1 each. So yeah, all those sorts of things. We create margin by
that's
making
really
wise
good.
decisions around where we can save a dollar, we save a dollar.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good. And while we're kind of on that, Tim, I want to talk to you a little bit further around. We've had some really interesting conversations through. There was a study that was done recently looking at sort of, I think it was mainly a US study, but looking at sort of giving trends and the impact that the church could have. Do you want to run us through some of that and then some of the insights that we've
Sure.
chatted about?
You want some numbers?
Please.
Sure. Again, USA study, but the numbers pretty much from a percentage-wise hold up in New Zealand. Just most of these studies happen in the US, and that's fine. So 5% of regular churchgoers in the US tithe, 5%, which is about, let's just nominally call tithing 10%. So 5% give 10%. If every Christian in the USA was to give 10% of their income, there would be an additional $165 billion a year in the US alone to be spent in the kingdom. Here's, to put that in perspective, how you could do. $25 billion a year could relieve global hunger, starvation and deaths from preventable diseases in 5 years. $12 billion a year could eliminate literacy in 5 years. Illiteracy, sorry. 15 billion a year could solve the world's water and sanitation issues. 1 billion a year could fully fund all overseas mission work.
Wow.
Which only leaves 100 to 110 billion left over for additional work of the kingdom, annually. It's crazy.
Do you
When
think
think
God
about-
had a plan in
Yeah,
that?
God's design is what gets me. You were talking about what amazes us when we see those numbers every year. You go, yeah, God's design of putting us in collective groups.
Yeah.
We can achieve so much more together than
Yeah.
we can individually. I mean, over $300,000 is a church to mission. You go, my minimal number of dollars contributed towards that. If I'd done that on my own, it doesn't make a difference, doesn't make a dent. But together it does.
Yeah.
And you go, yeah, God's design
Yeah.
is perfect.
Yeah.
So is it not true? And I said I was going to shut up, and I haven't.
That's good.
He put his microphone down, did you see?
Yeah,
noticed
but it's
he really
starting to
quickly
roll.
picked it up again.
That we don't rely on governments. God had a plan.
Yeah.
His church was the answer.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm off a rocker here, but I mean, governments play a part. But if we're talking about world hunger, we're talking about humanity, we're talking about caring for the people of this planet.
Yeah.
I think God had a plan through the church that if we were all faithful and obedient, we probably could do quite well.
Yeah, well, I mean, you think in a local context. Churches staff for the number of people that come, not the number of people who give.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
So the number of people who come won't necessarily change if everybody gave, but the margin would. We staff for the number of people who are here. If everybody gave, we'd have a whole bunch more money and we wouldn't have to hire a whole bunch more staff. It would be able to be used in that margin area.
So then I'd get a pay rise.
Then no, that's the point. No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't. You wouldn't, yeah. So God's...
You wouldn't.
No, that's right.
So yeah, like you say, God's design was to not be reliant on everybody else to do it. It's very easy as Christians to go, that's the government's job.
Yeah,
that's
right,
the
right.
charity's job. Actually, God's design was his church
It's ours.
was the answer.
Yeah, it's ours.
And we've moved it away from there. To put it in a local context, if you want to give some Life Church stats, we've got about 1,650 people on the database across our 3 locations. We break that down to giving units. So that would be adults, a family. So a married couple would be 1 giving unit. A married couple with 3 kids would be 1 giving unit. So we've got 812 giving units across our 3 locations. In the past 12 months, 438 of those giving units gave anything. Right, so that's 53.95%, which is well above the world average of in the mid-40s. All right, so we are a generous church, but 53.95%. All right, only 254 of those 812 gave to M3 last year. Imagine what we could achieve if everybody gave something.
Yeah.
So right now, M3 and general tithes and offerings is about $2 million a year. If we were to give, everybody gave at the same rate as the first 53.5%, that'd be $4 million a year. If everybody gave 10% a year of a New Zealand average salary, it'd be over $6 million a year. Wow. And if we were doing $6 million a year just in our general offering, would we do an M3?
No.
No.
I often talk, this is the tension, right? This sounds really brutal, but M3, yeah, it's great. It's great that we do it. But often I feel like we're just asking those who already give to give some more. Because those who have a conviction and understanding that giving's part of their worship step up and give over and above and go beyond. Perhaps we would, but my heart tells me we wouldn't need to be asking people for more and more. We'd be able to steward what we have and do everything that God's put in our hearts. Yeah,
Yeah, and
Am I wrong on that?
No, I mean, there's biblical models for Thanksgiving and offerings part of
Yeah.
Thanksgiving, so
Yeah.
we might still do it, but we wouldn't need to. At $6 million a year, our overheads would stay the same. So it's additional $4 million a year to pay off mortgage, to build buildings, to send to mission.
Man, we could wipe out some poverty across our city and
Poverty,
nation.
we could actually really make a big dent. And we're not going to get there, but that was God's design.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you go, man, if we could even get halfway there, the margin we could build
Yeah,
to sow
right.
into the mercy and the mission spaces, because our overheads don't change, right? Our electricity bill's our electricity bill, whether or not you give 5 million or 10 million. Right, it doesn't change in that 5 million scope. So the things that you can actually give to with the extra are the things that really matter.
Yeah,
Good.
it's really good. Can we give our panel a hand? Thank you, guys.